And welcome back to 13 Cares. I'm Sean Mazzarello here with Representative Adam Kinzinger, who represents Northern Illinois as part of his district. So talk to me about this manufacturing bill that just passed in December that you were pushing very hard.
Yeah, so this is a bill I introduced in 2012, I think now, and it's the American Manufacturing Competitiveness Act. At that time it was called of 2012. Yeah. And what it does is it brings, so look, I'm a big believer the federal government doesn't create jobs, but we can create an environment for jobs to be created. So what this does is it brings public sector folks together with private sector folks, Republicans and Democrats, onto a committee that can talk about areas where they have common ground. You know, how do we get manufacturing working in this country again? How do we get a national manufacturing strategy like most other first world countries have? Even third world countries have a manufacturing strategy. And it requires this group to report to the president and come up with a strategy. What you're going to do there is you're going to say, okay, what's the commonality between what private sector is saying? You know, for instance, somebody that has a factory or is involved with it here in Rockford, and then what the public government's saying. Sometimes in Washington, folks sit on high and think they know everything, and they've never worked in the sector. And it brings that together and tries to find areas of common ground where we can work together to bring manufacturing back. As you know, that's very important for the 16th
I was going to say,
district.
what does Northern Illinois bring to the table in that conversation?
Well, Northern Illinois, the Rockford area, and the 16th district is one of the most intense not only energy production areas, but especially in terms of manufacturing. I mean, you see it all over the place. You drive, you know, we know in the 1990s and the 2000s, Rockford took a serious hit from the loss of manufacturing. You see the middle class decline because of that, because manufacturing is the biggest driver of the middle class. But we're now seeing, I've been pretty excited because I think in the last few years we've started to see a manufacturing renaissance in this country, but especially in the Rockford area with job expansion and everything else. And so I'm actually pretty stoked about what the future holds in this area. We're going to have some challenges. We're going to have some tough times to get through. But people are hiring again. And the other thing I really love is how Rockford has really seemed to teach, the Rockford area seemed to teach the rest of Illinois and the rest of the country about education and the fact that, you know what, not every kid has to go to a four-year university. I believe if they want to, they should have the opportunity, but maybe having some hands-on training in manufacturing to see what's available, because we need to graduate kids and keep them here.
Because you see that partnership coming up just with this jet repair facility, AAR.
That's right.
Saying it wants to come to Winnebago County, working with Rock Valley College for a program specifically for that. And right now there's kind of a lot of talk about how to fund this. They have to build a $40 million facility. Airport says yes. The county and the city are discussing their portion of it. Would you hate to see this not happen, AAR?
Yeah, you know, the politics in the county, I'll let those folks deal with, but it would be tragic if this didn't come. I think it's going to be 500 well-paying jobs. This is a big driver. I'm proud of the Rockford Airport. I think the Rockford Airport is the third airport in Illinois, you know, with what it brings in terms of cargo and what it could potentially bring. You know, as a pilot myself, I remember with the military flying in and out of Rockford Airport, and I fly my private plane. Sometimes I own a little aircraft into the Rockford Airport, and it's just a fantastic facility here. And so AAR and bringing those jobs, I think, can be an anchor point for even more expansion here, and I think this is going to be something to help us again strengthen the middle class in the area, to bring wealth back, to balance our checkbooks and do what we need to do.
And talking about infrastructure, rail is another important issue around here. This Chicago to Rockford Amtrak service, it started under the Quinn administration, now being carried through to Rauner. Again, it's a state funding thing. I get that. The federal government is in on it somewhat, but tell me about how important Commuter Rail is to all of your district, not just Rockford.
I think Commuter Rail is extremely important. Now, most of my district is not serviced by Commuter Rail. I live about 50 minutes kind of southwest of Chicago. It does not have Commuter Rail access. Make a huge difference if it did. Rockford would have a huge difference if it did. People could, you know, commute into Chicago more often, pick Rockford as an area to live, and just get around a lot better. The state's facing some very tough finances. I mean, decades of mismanagement has led to a real big hole in the budget, so there's some tough decisions that are going to have to be made.
It almost seems like it mirrors the federal issue too, this idea of spending cuts versus raising taxes, and just recently Governor Rauner introduced his budget and deep cuts, and people aren't happy about it. It almost echoes what Congress is trying to do.
Well, you know, look, whenever we spend, Congress has had the luxury, if you want to call it that, of we can spend into debt. It's not a good thing, but we can do that because, you know, we print our currency, we own our The state government can't do that. And so we found in the federal government, decades of spending into debt has led to plenty of interest that has to be spent, which means you can't invest that money into schools and into infrastructure. We spent $300 billion last year just in interest, maintaining our debt. Imagine if we could invest that in infrastructure and in schools, what you'd be able to do. So, look, there's going to have to be some tough decisions made, but chief among them is going to be, we lived excessively for a long time. We're going to have to tighten the belt a little bit.
Another topic you've been talking about recently is drug addiction, and working with some of our local facilities and talking to them about it. Explain to me what you've been doing on that.
So I had my life was impacted when I went to Rosecrans and met with a bunch of teenagers and drug addiction, and the administrator there asked me, he goes, ask the kids what they're addicted to. And, when I was in high school, the drugs were all marijuana and things like that. Half the kids were addicted to heroin. So I started to really ask this question, what's the deal with heroin? And I fly counter drug as a military pilot as well. And I realized that heroin is a huge epidemic. It's a huge epidemic in northern Illinois and, frankly, all across Illinois and the country. And what's happening is kids are being addicted first to Vicodin and other kinds of opioids, and then you can't get the same high from the same amount of pills, so eventually they jump to heroin. Nobody starts by injecting heroin at first. And what you see is a lot of great, talented kids find themselves overdosed and in many cases dead on this drug. I had a close friend whose son was this recently happened to. So we can't solve all that problem, but I think through education, making it tougher to have the initial drugs that kids get addicted to would work wonders for our youth in this area.
What can you do on the federal level?
I think part of it is, we made opioids a much tougher scheduled drug, so it's harder to get. It's harder to go into the pharmacy and fake a prescription, for instance, and get those. So I think that's some of the things we can do. An increase enforcement of the suppliers of heroin. The more heroin you take off the street, the more expensive it becomes, supply and demand. Expensive it becomes, the more difficult it is for kids to buy this because they don't have a ton of disposable income. So, look, it's a tough issue, but it's one that if we don't address it, we're going to see more of our youth die to this.
Speaking of issues, if people have things they want to bring to your attention, I know you recently announced you're doing some traveling office hours. What are you making available, your staff, and what can people do to reach out to you about things that are important to them in the district that you serve them in?
Well, I most times when I'm not in D.C., I come home, unless I'm doing military or something like that, and I travel around the district. We have 14 counties. It's a huge district. But I have a fantastic staff, and they work for the people of the district, and that's who they work for. And so when I'm not around, they do these traveling office hours. You can see them at kinzinger.house.gov. You guys may link to that on your site as well. And it's just an opportunity to come out, speak to staff, and say, hey, this is on my mind. This is an issue we're having, and we can try to resolve that. Another big area, if people have Veterans Affairs issues with Social Security, red tape on the federal government, it's not partisan. Not everything we do in this is partisan.
Yeah.
We'll help you out.
And some people feel boxed in and alone on those issues, and they need someone with a voice. So that's a great point. They can come to you with that and see if they can get some help.
I call my staff sometimes the bureaucracy slayer. They can slay right through that bureaucracy.
All right, since we're almost done, got to mention you have a birthday coming up.
Yeah.
You excited?
No, because I'm a year older now. I'm 37, and that takes me 3 years to 40. So I hear from 40, it just all goes really fast.
Well, come on. How many 37-years-olds are in Congress right now?
There's not many of us.
There you go.
Not many of us.
All right, Representative Kinzinger, thanks so much.